So Panasonic have just announced the S5 II. We've done a full review on it. That's on our channel already, so I'll pop a link to that down in the description and in the comments as well, just to make it super easy to go and see that. But my overall thoughts were that this feels like the culmination of everything Panasonic have been working towards since they originally released the S1 and the S1R back in 2019. This is the first Panasonic camera that really actually makes me think I might consider switching myself as well. So safe to say, I really liked it. But what are the key differences between the S5 and the S5 II? And if you're looking at both cameras, which one is the one for you? Now, I'll just start by saying it's safe to say with this particular comparison, this is a really decent upgrade. And I think that if you have the means to go for the S5 II, I think that this is a very future-proofed camera that offers an enormous amount, whether it's photo, video, or the perfect mix for this specific camera, which is a hybrid shooter. If you shoot photo and video, the S5 II is going to really do you a lot of good. But let's get into some of those key differences to help you make up your mind, because the S5 is still a great camera and it's been improved over the years since it came out with firmware updates as well. So there's a lot to really like there as well. Let's jump into what the key differences are. So first up, let's talk about what's the same. We've got the same megapixel, we've got the same resolution sensor, we've got a 24.2 megapixel sensor in both the S5 and the S5 II. They both have the high resolution shot mode, which will shoot 96 megapixels. They both have dual native ISO, although I must admit it feels like it's better on the S5 II. The low light performance seems really good. It's very clean with higher ISO values. They both share the same LCD screen, which is a flip out screen. It's 1840K dots, and they're both dust and splash resistant. But this is where we're going to start getting to some of the differences between these two cameras. Now, Panasonic is known for having very good image stabilization. It's amongst the best just out there. In fact, I'd probably say it's some of the best I've ever used, and it's improved on the S5 II. So the S5 already has very good image stabilization, but the S5 II does have better image stabilization, and it even has an active mode, which is fantastic for walking. It almost makes it feel like you're using a gimbal when you're just shooting handheld walking with the camera, which is absolutely ridiculous that it works that well. While they share the same megapixel count, we do see an increase in the burst shooting mode on the S5 II. So the S5 will shoot 7 frames a second if you're using AFS and 5 frames a second with AFC, whereas the S5 II, that's up to 9 frames a second AFS and 7 frames a second AFC, but if you use that electronic shutter, you can get 30 frames a second in the burst mode, which is it's really good. I mean, if you're shooting wildlife, you're shooting sports, that's going to really be a very helpful thing. Just makes it a much more versatile camera for different genres as well. And of course, I'm not going to put it off any longer. The biggest update, the biggest change is that autofocus. Panasonic have added phase hybrid autofocus to the S5 II. It's something that pretty much all of us have wanted to happen for years. I mean, we've just been waiting for this to be a thing that happens. It's here, it's done, and it works really well, like really well. It really stands up to other competitors in the industry now. It really kind of holds its own. And this was the one thing that was putting off a lot of people with Panasonic. And this, for me, is worth the price of admission alone to go for the S5 II over the S5. The S5 is still a fantastic camera, but you will notice the difference day one of using that camera with this autofocus. It is just night and day. It's super reliable. It's really good. The tracking is much better. Everything just works a lot better with the S5 II when it comes to autofocus. We actually see a massive increase in the number of AF points as well. It's up to 779 on the S5 II, whereas 225 on the S5. But that's just a small part of the picture of how well that autofocus works and how much it's been improved. Elsewhere, we see some nice upgrades in terms of the design of the camera. So for example, the S5 II has a very nice discrete fan, which is going to stop any kind of overheating issues. Now, it's not that I think the S5 ever really had overheating issues, and I certainly never had any issues with that, but you're definitely not going to have that as a problem with the S5 II. There's also a few smaller things which just make life a lot nicer when using the S5 II. So for example, the joystick is now an 8-directional joystick. So up, down, left, right, but also diagonal, which is nice for when you're moving focus points around and you don't want to have to go up and then right. You can just move it diagonally. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but once you get used to that, you really wouldn't want to go back to how it was. That's the same with the full-size HDMI port as well. It's a really nice thing to have on there that was kind of missing from the S5, and we see it now on the S5 II. Now, speaking of video, we also see some nice upgrades here. This is a more versatile camera when it comes to how you want to shoot your video, how you want to shoot it in terms of frame rate, bit rate, all that kind of stuff. We see the resolution increased here, so 6K on the S5 II versus 4K on the S5. There's no limit at all for recording time on the S5 II, whereas in the S5 it was no limit when you're shooting an 8-bit. And like I say, there's just more choice for how you want to shoot this when it comes to resolution, 10-bit, 422, 420. You've got a lot of choice there. And something that's probably overlooked a little bit is the audio as well. It's better on the S5 II. You've got 4-channel audio, that's up to 96 kilohertz. So you've got some nice quality audio. I'd have no issue at all plugging a microphone into the S5 II. I don't know that I would always need to have a separate audio recorder. A lot of people will, but actually some really nice specs there for the audio side of things, which sometimes is a little overlooked when it comes to video. The bottom line for me here is that Panasonic are obviously listening to everything people want from their cameras. They obviously have taken on board everything people said they wanted in the S5. Obviously the big thing is autofocus, but even things like the full-size HDMI, USB-C as well, which I didn't mention, but that's on the S5 II as well. The 8-way directional joystick. These things are really important to people actually using the camera, and Panasonic, in some ways more than other brands actually, it feels like they're listening to what their customers actually want and then delivering that. And this is quite a camera, because this is going to tick a lot of boxes for a lot of different people. And certainly for me, this one's got me thinking a little bit here. Something else to consider as well, there are a lot more lenses available now than there were obviously back when the S5 launched, and certainly when the S1 and the S1R launched. There's a lot of nice lenses. They're not all ridiculously expensive, which is really nice. There's a really nice kind of set of primes, all f1.8. We did a video on that recently, which will work really nicely with the S5 II. They're all roughly the same weight and size, so if you're using a gimbal, it's going to be very easy to switch over the lenses. But of course, I don't know that you need to use a gimbal. If you're a solo content creator using this camera, this is going to be a dream. The quality of the video is going to be fantastic. And then you don't have to use a gimbal. You can shoot handheld very reliably because of that image stabilization. And of course, the autofocus, which especially as a solo shooter, is very useful to be able to rely on that, to lean on that rather than having to maybe do manual focus or having to use the autofocus, which hasn't been so reliable in the past. But those are the key differences between the S5, the S5 II. Panasonic released a good camera with the S5 and then took all of that feedback, all of the things people actually wanted to add in or change, and they just went for it. And they've really, really nailed this one. I cannot explain to you how much I've enjoyed using the S5 II. So absolutely, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments, because I'd love to hear, what are you thinking about the S5 II? I think this is one of the most exciting cameras I've used for a good while, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Pop them down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, of course, because there's new content all the time. You can check out the S5 II, the S5 IIX, the S5, all that stuff by following the links down in the description. I'll pop links so you can go check out all the spec of all that stuff, which is super fun. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.